The force of the impact ruptured the hull of the satellite, the vacuum of space instantaneously taking care of the rest. It pulled the external metalwork to shreds as if it was as light and thin as tissue paper. In the same moment, it forcefully wrenched the astronauts on board out into the cold void beyond. No oxygen, no light. Most were dead the second the satellite ripped apart, their lifeless bodies floating among the resultant debris drifting through space, dwarfed by the sheer size of the Earth. But not everything was destroyed. The two objects that had struck the satellite, punching a hole right through it, were still alive. Back down on the surface, panic swept through the control room. Foundation analysts scrambled for answers, frantically trying to reestablish visual contact after the primary satellite uplink failed without warning. They had a trace on the two objects careening through space, but at present, they were just a pair of blinking radar dots on a screen. One of the readings kept vanishing from their scopes, only to reappear almost instantly next to the other dot, before being sent hurtling away from it. It happened again and again, almost like the first dot was closing the distance and the other was swatting it away. Even up there in space, it looked like they still weren't done fighting. Suddenly, one of the objects plummeted back towards the Earth. It was as though it had been struck with such force, it was careening in and out of controlled descent back towards the planet's outer atmosphere, and the other object in hot pursuit. It would chase the falling dot, catch up with it, only to strike it again and send it falling faster towards the Earth with each hit. Just as the Foundation was able to reposition another satellite, capturing one image of the two objects, they vanished from view, practically invisible against the size of the world they were quickly returning to. The image was pulled up on screen and enhanced for the whole control room to see. There were two humanoid shapes, silhouetted against the clouds of the exosphere. One was spindly, disproportionately long limbs flailing as it fell. The latter of the two objects was almost as tall, but far brawnier, with bulging alien musculature, visible even from the satellite's distance. Frantically, the Foundation's analysts attempted to triangulate the point of impact that the humanoid anomalies were descending towards. At their current trajectory, if they landed in the densely populated area or struck any kind of standing structure, then it wouldn't just cause massive amounts of damage, it would likely lead to significant casualties. The two combatants might survive, but anyone around the impact site might not be so lucky. And if the Foundation couldn't figure out a plan quickly, then this fight between SCP-096 and Battle Beast could end in disastrous consequences for humanity. To the SCP Foundation, given the sheer volume of anomalous entities, objects, creatures, people, and places they had encountered on Earth, the existence of aliens was almost quaint. The notion that one day visitors from beyond the stars might arrive was almost quaint to an organization that battled cognito-hazards, eldritch entities, and malevolent reality-warping gods as part of its daily routine. But of course, even when aliens are an expected, almost boring occurrence, it's not like anyone was expecting them to be so furry. Deep space scans had picked up a small blip, but it was an item so small that it wasn't even detected until it entered the solar system. Most space agencies wrote it off as a glitch or a harmless piece of rock floating through the stars. However, one of the SCP Foundation's agents embedded within NASA decided to be safe rather than sorry, and passed on an alert about the existence of this unknown object to the Foundation. But by the time they learned about it, the tiny object was already making a beeline directly towards Earth. It continued hurtling through space, traveling in a perfectly straight line, until it breached the exosphere, the outermost layer of Earth's atmosphere. Before this point, the Foundation had been waiting with bated breath, hoping that whatever this alien object was, it would burn up on entry into the atmosphere, or at least divert its path before it reached the Earth. On both counts, they weren't so lucky. The Foundation's vast resources allowed them to scramble fighter jets at a moment's notice, sending attack aircraft loaded for bear into the skies to intercept the incoming object. It was only when their pilots were close enough that they got a good enough look at it, and quickly realized to the Foundation that this wasn't an object at all. The pilots described seeing a tall humanoid alien with a powerful build and noticeable lion-like features. The parts of its body that were visible were covered in white fur, as the rest also presumably was. The snowy mane that surrounded the creature's head had been styled into braids on either side. It wore a predominantly black outfit, in the shape of a leotard, that covered its chest and legs but left its bulging arms exposed. It was accented with red at the shoulders, along with toeless red boots and matching gloves, complete with a distinctive red and yellow patterned belt. Though unknown to the SCP Foundation, this was a member of the Dornian, a mammalian alien species that resembled bipedal leonine humanoids. The history of their world, Dornan, was that of a savage, untamable planet marred by constant war. Yet among that entire bloodied history, there was one Dornian who rose to notoriety. He was said to possess an unending rage that burned away inside him, boiling over to the point where he could not contain it. As his strength grew to match his bottomless well of fury, he would become infamous not only on Dornan, but throughout the galaxy. His name was Thok, though the denizens of the planets he visited would come to know him by different names. Some called him the Scourge of Twin Galaxies, others knew him simply as Battle Beast. And this just so happened to be the Dornian who had arrived on Earth. You see, over time Throck's bloodlust had brought peace to his world, ending all wars on Dornan. Yet still his rage continued in its intensity, knowing no peace. When the rest of his planet came to realize this warrior's relentless anger was not a gift, but a curse, he was forced to leave his home, to prevent his rage from destroying the utopia he'd helped create. Ever since, the cruel and bloodthirsty Dornian had been scouring the universe in search of a worthy opponent, one who could withstand or exhaust his unending rage. He had been unmatched in every battle he had ever fought, and now his travels had brought him to Earth. Wasting no time, as soon as the incoming fighter jets were close enough, Battle Beast had found his next opponents. He sped through the air, zipping between them at speeds that almost surpassed the most top-of-the-line jets of any Earth military. The pair that had flown out to intercept the oncoming alien took evasive action, trying to maneuver out of Battle Beast's path, just as he had anticipated they would. As a master combatant, his combat prowess was unmatched. Battle Beast's every movement was pre-planned and carried out with efficiency, all with the sole objective of neutralizing his opponents, and he was only too pleased to demonstrate his skills on arrival. Swiping his weapon of choice, his trusty mace, he struck the wing of one of the fighter jets as he passed between them. The sheer force of the impact, delivered with superhuman strength, caused the entire wing to crumple. The pilot was quickly losing control of his jet and pulled the emergency eject. The cockpit burst open and fired the pilot's seat outwards, only for a clawed hand to catch it. Riding on the back of the jet as it spiraled out of control, Battle Beast hadn't just used his mace to hit the wing, but anchor himself to it. He clambered atop the jet and prevented the pilot from making a safe escape. Grabbing the human with both his clawed hands, Throck tore him in two, then smashed both halves together, leaving little but a fine mist. The second jet had noticed what was happening and began moving in for attack, but Battle Beast was ready for this, too. As the second jet opened fire, spewing a hail of bullets from its mounted gun, Throck used the momentum of the first falling fighter against it, steadying it like a gigantic surfboard. Then, as a missile was let loose, sailing through the air towards him, Battle Beast forced his fighter to point vertically, directly downwards, creating a flat surface, just as the missile struck. The force of the warhead's explosion turned the falling plane into a catapult that launched Battle Beast in a retaliatory strike against the other plane. His mace was raised above his head, ready to bring it smashing down through the second fighter jet's cockpit. By now, the SCP Foundation was desperately trying to come up with a solution. They had no context for who this being was, other than a violent extraterrestrial warrior, and seemingly no conventional weapons that could so much as leave a scratch on him. So they were forced to think drastically and quickly of a non-conventional solution to combating the mighty Battle Beast. What they came up with certainly ticked the unconventional box. Getting a lock on Battle Beast's location, the Foundation authorized the launching of yet another missile at the Dornian warrior. This one, however, carried with it a slightly different payload than the last. Battle Beast turned to see the projectile arcing over the horizon, steadying himself for its impact, only for something rare to happen: the unexpected. While sailing through the air, still hundreds of feet from hitting him, the missile detonated, sending distant specks of scattered debris showering in all directions. At this distance, Battle Beast had no way of seeing that one of the pieces was alive. In a flash, the anomalous being that had been unceremoniously wrangled from its cell with a bag over its head and crammed aboard a missile suddenly stood behind Battle Beast. Having teleported from midair to the spot behind the Dornian, SCP-096 stood shrieking. Its rage state activated the second it was freed from the confines of the warhead, already angered by the detonation, and now focusing all of its rage on Throck. But Battle Beast had plenty of rage to channel back at the Shy Guy. The first swipe of the creature's elongated arms caught Battle Beast off guard, a lucky hit that staggered the surprised leonine alien. Though he was hurled a few short feet away, Battle Beast was hardly injured by the strike. His Dornian physiology made him exceptionally durable, able to withstand most attacks without showing any signs of significant damage. Even on the rare occasions he did sustain injuries, there was little amount of pain that could shake his determination or diminish his fighting ability. Now he'd been presented with what seemed to be this planet's champion. He wouldn't relent until he or SCP-096 was incapacitated. Charging swiftly towards the Shy Guy, Battle Beast's mace was held downwards as he ran, poised to land a colossally powerful blow once he'd closed the distance. He weaved between swipes of SCP-096's claws, but just as he was about to swing his mace, the creature had vanished from the spot it had just been standing in. This kind of unexpected maneuver challenged Battle Beast's tactical genius. His opponent was a creature of instinct. It barely adhered to the laws of physics, and didn't even seem to act with any intention behind its actions, just rage. But SCP-096 had honed in on Throck, and that meant it wasn't retreating by teleporting away. It was looking for an opening. With a savage spin, Battle Beast swung his mace and brought it smashing into SCP-096 just as the Shy Guy appeared behind the Dornian. The sheer force of the superpowered blow was enough to send the gangly-limbed creature upwards with such speed that he reached several hundred feet off the ground, blinking back to near where Battle Beast stood in seconds. But this gave the alien warrior an idea. He ducked between a flurry of strikes, occasionally allowing the odd claw to scratch him, only to parry it with another mighty hit from his mace. The next time he was able to hit SCP-096 into the sky, Battle Beast channeled his superhuman strength and agility into leaping off the ground, up to SCP-096 before it could teleport back down to Earth. Each time he struck the Shy Guy, Throck's focus was on closing the distance before the anomalous monster had a chance to, driving them further and further upwards into the atmosphere. Out in space, Battle Beast had an even greater advantage. As evidently durable as SCP-096 was, the Dornian possessed a superhuman lung capacity, able to hold his breath and continue to fight even in the vacuum of space. And once he and SCP-096 had breached the outer layer of Earth's atmosphere, Battle Beast no longer had gravity restricting him. Grabbing SCP-096, his durable Dornian claws pierced the resilient skin of the Shy Guy. Battle Beast threw his opponent towards the nearest object, a satellite that the Foundation was using to watch the fight. SCP-096 crashed through the outer hull of the satellite, with Battle Beast following in close pursuit, before striking the creature repeatedly back down to Earth. As they returned to the surface, Battle Beast and the Shy Guy were subjected to a barrage of ordnance from the Foundation. It was a futile attempt at diverting their descent course from hitting any major population centers. The explosions barely left a scratch on either combatant, serving as little more than a nuisance than a hindrance to their bout. By the time the pair of them came hurtling through the sky above Redacted, the Foundation hadn't had enough time to clear the city. Battle Beast and SCP-096 came crashing through a skyscraper, leveling the entire structure, with untold casualties trapped inside. When the dust settled, the debris shifted, and Battle Beast stood by, barely a scratch on him, his fur stained red. Beneath his boots was nothing but a puddle, with SCP-096 nowhere to be seen. Sneering, the Dornian abruptly left the pitiful planet. It was obvious he wouldn't find a worthy opponent here on Earth. Now check out what if SCP-096 was put inside SCP-914, and can SCP-096 chase its victims across the multiverse? For more.